right, you've heard from John James. Let's move to the other side of the race now, and the incumbent Democratic senator from the state of Michigan, Gary Peters. Senator Peters, good to have you back on Flashpoint. Thanks very much for the time today.
Oh, always great to be with you, Devin.
I want to start the same way that I did with John James, and as obviously a kind of guy who hosts a political program, as a journalist, and occasionally moderates a debate or two. I'm still very dismayed that we've gotten here 2 weeks away from Election Day, and we weren't able to get to a face-to-face debate together from you two. And that seems a real disservice to voters to me.
Well, I agree. I agreed to debates in July. Never heard from the James campaign. They want to debate debates. I'm not sure what they're up to. I basically agreed to the 2 debates that Senate candidates have done since the 1990s. Mr. James debated Debbie in Grand Rapids and in Detroit with public broadcasting. It's then broadcast all across the state. I'm excited to debate. I'd love to hear John James actually talk about issues. I don't ever hear that. So I would certainly love to have that debate. I agreed in July. We have not heard from the James campaign. They've talked about other things, but clearly are not serious. They want to debate debates. They don't actually.
Yes, and I don't want to debate debates either, but I can only speak for Channel 4. John James accepted our invitation and your campaign did not, but I'll renew the invitation again if that helps at all with 2 weeks to go.
Well, I've already agreed to 2 debates, the debates that were done in the last election, and basically the same venue and the same format that every Senate race since the 1990s has done. So to me, that's, I don't know what more to do except to accept that. Again, Mr. James likes to debate debates because he doesn't want to talk about issues, it's clear.
Well, let's move on to what's happening in this race right now. It is breathtakingly expensive. We're up north of $70 million being spent on this race. It's easy to possibly see here over the next 2 weeks it approaching even the record that was set in the last time's around's gubernatorial race, which would be jaw-dropping. There's clearly an awful lot of interest from all over the country. But one of the things that is obviously not lost on the Republican Party is what's happening in the polls, where Joe Biden is doing better in Michigan than Michigan's incumbent Democratic senator. Why do you suppose you look vulnerable right now to Republicans?
Well, I'm just running my race. We're going to be talking to voters about my record, which is very clear over the years. I don't really focus on these public polls. They're all over the place, as you know. But I don't think it should be a surprise to anybody that Joe Biden is known more than I am with folks. Joe Biden is running for president. He's been in office a long time, and we're still running our campaign. People are looking at the 2 candidates, and I'm not concerned about that at all.
Well, let's start talking then about some specific issues. I spent a long time here a few moments ago talking with John James about health care, and I guess that's where I'd like to start. You have talked about not wanting the Affordable Care Act to be the only medical plan, that you're not a fan of universal health care. Rather than talking about the criticism that you're hearing from the right on Obamacare, let's talk about the criticism from the left and other people who would like to see you support a universal health care plan for Americans. And I think some people would suggest that right now in the pandemic is the time for them to make their case. Wouldn't it be better right now if everybody was under the same health care system, whether it be the records that help us delineate who's had what kind of care, where anybody is being treated at any given moment? Not to mention the way that costs could be meted out here on this kind of care that this pandemic has required.
Well, right now I support the Affordable Care Act and to strengthen the Affordable Care Act. And as you know, Devin, the Republicans and Mr. James basically want to throw that all out, which would mean folks in Michigan would be losing critical health care coverage. Folks who have pre-existing conditions would lose the protection that they have right now that entitles them to get quality, affordable health care. The Medicaid expansion, over 800,000 people would lose health care. Seniors would see an increase in their drug prices. And we need to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, make sure we're fixing what's not working right, celebrate what works, but continue to make sure we're not only expanding the access, but also dealing with the cost. And One of those areas that I've focused on is the increasing cost of prescription drugs, which continue to increase at a rate that's unacceptable. We need to force Medicare, or I should say allow Medicare, to actually negotiate with drug companies to get a lower price. It makes no sense whatsoever that Medicare, a big customer, can't negotiate with drug companies. Every major company can do that. Medicare should do the same thing. But Senate Republicans won't even put the bill on the floor. They won't allow that because of the fact that they're close to the pharmaceutical companies. To me, that's where we have to go. We've got to continue to make progress going forward, and that has to be the focus. I mean, we may be confronted very shortly with this new Supreme Court nominee who has basically written that she thinks it's unconstitutional. It'll be thrown out. We're going to need to elect folks who are going to go to office and say, we've got to make sure that we have affordable health care for folks. And you know, unlike my opponent, Mr. James, who has no plan whatsoever, he has some talking points, and they're memorized. And whenever he's asked a question about a plan, he usually just has a blank stare and then goes back into his memorized talking points again. And these are serious times. You're right. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We need serious folks who understand these issues and understand the pieces that need to be fixed right now.
I want to get to the Supreme Court in a moment, but let me stay with health care because, again, why not a universal kind of system that Bernie Sanders has talked about and that others really feel like they see in this moment an opportunity to talk about universal health care, which most of the rest of the world has?
Well, I think we can continue to make sure folks have options with their health care. So that's why, if you're talking about Medicare, when it comes to the Affordable Care Act, part of the Affordable Care Act is a state exchange, which allows folks who may not have private health insurance to be able to buy into the exchange. It's subsidized based on their income, so it's affordable for everybody. And then they get a range of options that they can pick from. I believe and support legislation to make Medicare one of those options. If you want to buy into Medicare, you can do that through the state exchange. Also lowering the eligibility for Medicare for folks who want to buy into Medicare down to the age of 50. So I think that should be an option, and the American people will clearly have that option. They can weigh the different alternatives that are out there, and if they want to have Medicare as part of their state exchange, they can choose that. If they want to buy Medicare instead of a private plan at age 50 or up, they can do that. And I think as folks buy it, if we see that that's where individuals want to go, certainly a plan will evolve based on what Americans would like to see.
Let me jump in there because you were just criticizing John James on health care. He is not seeing you as beyond criticism on health care. Let's watch one of the ads that has been taken out against you during this campaign and let you react to that. Here's the ad.
Can you name one thing Gary Peters has done for you? He wants us to lean into the Green New Deal, a socialist plan that would kill our jobs and send electric bills skyrocketing. Peters also backs a government-run healthcare plan that would slash hundreds of billions in funding for our hospitals and could force 44 Michigan hospitals to close. Healthcare cuts, hospital closures. Michigan can't afford Gary Peters. Senate Leadership Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Now, this is from a PAC. I should not suggest that that was necessarily an ad that came from the James campaign, but react to what you just heard.
Yeah, that's an ad from Mitch McConnell, who's putting millions and millions and millions of dollars to support John James. That ad is really pretty typical to the ads we see from Mitch McConnell, what we see from other the outside billionaires that are supporting John James. Even some of his own ads are basically the ones that fact checkers have all looked at and basically said they're false. Mr. James and his friends are just running attack ads against me that independent fact checkers, like PolyFact and others, have said are, let me see, they've said they're false, they're demonstrably false, they're smears, they are ads that represent why people hate politics because of it. This is just another example of the types of smears that we're seeing from this campaign. You know, I would like a campaign to talk about issues and things that we're working on. Certainly, I talk about my record. You look at my ads, it's talking about the fact that I've been ranked as one of the most effective U.S. senators in getting things done. I'm one of the most bipartisan in bringing people together. That's what I'm talking about.
But you know the old saying, there's only 3 times when negative campaigning works, when you're behind, when you're ahead, or when you're even. One of the other ads, though, does take you to task over ACA, and it says that, and we'll make this our last thought on health care, but that if you think the Affordable Care Act is is so great. Why aren't you a part of it? It is available for members of Congress. But your health care, your own plan, is one from a state for Michigan representatives and legislators, and that it's ACA exempt.
Well, you know, the Affordable Care Act covers all health plans, so I'm not sure where that's coming from. There is a state exchange, which is part of the Affordable Care Act, where you can buy in the state exchange. But you have to remember that the Affordable Care Act impacts private insurance plans as well. It impacts Medicare. In fact, because of the Affordable Care Act, senior citizens when in Medicare get help when they go into the donut hole. Actually reduces prescription cost to seniors. That's why if the Affordable Care Act is repealed, as the Republicans want to get rid of it, seniors on Medicare will pay more for their prescription drugs.
Well, and this is
the fact that now health plans have a cap right now. The idea that you would have a cap, that if your expenses go up, you're capped at what your lifetime benefits are or your
Understood.
annual benefits.
Let's
that means before the Affordable Care Act, Devin, this is really clear. I mean, before the Affordable Care Act, people would go into bankruptcy because their insurance wouldn't cover enough, including the private plans.
Absolutely.
The Affordable Care Act deals with all sorts of plans, so that's really that's an argument.
This is why I wish I had the two of you together, because he talks about the out-of-control costs as well. But let me let's move to the Supreme Court. You just teed that up for us a little bit and what's going to happen there. Before I get to some of the issues facing the Supreme Court, and maybe this is my own little personal mission, I just asked John James this. I'm wondering if the party that is in power in the Senate is ever going to vote to take away some of its own power and go back to a day when 60 votes were required to confirm a Supreme Court nominee. Because short of that, it seems to me that we're always going to end up with a very partisan process as we go forward through this nominating process, which we've just seen here. Would you be willing to commit to moving back to demanding 60 votes for a nominee to be confirmed to the U.S. Senate?
I do think we have to put in place mechanisms to do that, and I'd certainly be open to taking a look at that, because we've got to get back to where, particularly when it comes to the Supreme Court, that we can put forward nominees that get 80, 90 votes. That's what used to happen in the past. What we now have is this hyper-partisanship, which is not the way that our founders envisioned the Supreme Court. It was the neutralizing body between a partisan executive and a partisan legislature. But that does not occur right now, because folks are just looking at the hyper-partisanship of a judge that's going to move their particular political view forward. And the fact that this is being pushed right now, the fact that when we're not just close to an election, we're actually in an election. Already in Michigan, well over 1 million people have voted. Throughout American history, we have not confirmed a Supreme Court nominee past July of an election year, because it was considered too close. With Justice Ginsburg passing roughly 40 days prior to the election day, it was the second shortest time. The shortest time was in Abraham Lincoln was our president. And Abraham Lincoln said, I'm not going to jeopardize the legitimacy of the Supreme Court and jam through a nominee. It's wrong. Now, of course, Abraham Lincoln is on Mount Rushmore. He's a revered president. Our current president, of course, can't be compared in any shape or form to Abraham Lincoln. But that's what we need. We need folks who are statespeople, who will understand that we've got to preserve the legitimacy of these democratic institutions, or we're going to just continue to be in these incessant fights. And, you know, that's not something I do. I'm someone who takes pride in working in a bipartisan way, bringing people together. And we've got to do more of that.
Let me point out that you have said no to the idea of expanding the court while we wait for Joe Biden to give us a more definitive answer on that. But as to the decisions that the Supreme Court might be coming to here soon, Roe versus Wade, to many people, seems to be in play. You got an awful lot of attention for your very personal story that you talked about a week and a half ago now, about your first wife, Heidi, needing a third trimester abortion. It was heartbreaking, I think, and a lot of people understood the agony that you both went through. But since that,
correct that, it was second trimester.
Second trimester. Yes, I'm sorry. Second trimester. But I believe in what we've started to see now. Some anti-abortion activists are saying, yes, it's a heartbreaking story, but many anti-abortion activists believe that there should be exceptions for, like yours, when the life of the mother is in danger. And the truth is, while this was a story that got everybody's tugged at their heartstrings, the truth is that most abortions in America are elective rather than driven by the kind of thing that you all went through. I'm curious about, I'm sure you've heard that point being made here now since this came out. I'm curious about your response to that criticism.
Well, these are stories people need to hear. This is obviously intensely personal, and since I've told that story, I've been hearing from women all across the state who have had very similar experiences. These are gut-wrenching decisions. They're decisions that should be made between a woman and her physician and family members, whoever she wants to have part of that very intimate and very personal decision. But folks have to understand this is what many families go through. This was a medical procedure that was necessary. There was no way the fetus would survive. The physician sent Heidi back to basically wait for a miscarriage over days, which is the anguish associated with that. And even that physician and the story, if folks look at the story, he called back when he tried to get approval through the hospital to be able to do this. They said no, and I will never forget what he said on the answering machine. He said, "This is based on politics. It's not based on medicine. You have to find someone right now that can take care of this as quickly as possible, because you're likely to lose your uterus and you could potentially lose your life."
But if Roe versus Wade, Senator, was turned aside, does that necessarily change what your wife had to go through?
Well, it could. You're going to see legislation that could go forward that could severely restrict the ability to make these important decisions. Reproductive freedom will clearly be constrained. I mean, just think of my opponent. Mr. James believes that he is anti-abortion, and he believes in no exceptions. No exception for rape, no exception for incest. That's a very extreme position. To have a gentleman like Mr. James in there making the laws, women have to know that he believes that if they're raped, the government should tell that woman she's going to have to carry that baby. That's outrageous.
Let me, I want to, before we run out of time, I want to quickly get your thought on the nation's approach to COVID. You're a part of the government that has reacted to all of that. I suppose you bear some responsibility for what has or hasn't happened out of Capitol Hill on that front. But you were one of many who, you've seen the clip now of you talking about believing that at one point that the coronavirus wasn't that big of a threat. Tell me a little bit now about hindsight, and where do we go from here? What should we do?
Well, you're referring to another one of the ads that fact checkers have said is demonstrably false.
It was, yes, it was not in context. Yes.
It was not, so I'm glad. Let me explain it. This is what Mr. James does and his folks. This is what they do. So they took a clip. This was in early February. This is the time when the president, of course, is out there saying there's no problem, it's going to go away, it's going to disappear. We just had a briefing from the administration that said at that point there were 13 cases that were identified. And so an individual going out, there were 13 cases in the entire country. There wasn't an immediate risk for folks at that point. But then I go on in I believe what it was, another 2 minutes. But I said, we have to take this very seriously. This could develop into a worldwide pandemic. This has serious ramifications. No one should say otherwise. But that's not what the ad said. This is a prime example of why people hate these kinds of ads that Mr. James is putting out in his friends. And it is really, so any ad you pull up from him, the negative attacks, just look at all the fact checks. They're very clear.
Senator,
this guy is running on falsehoods.
And I'm afraid I got to leave it there in my desire to make sure that the two of you got equal time today. Senator Peters, I so appreciate the time. And hopefully, I'm still holding out hope that we can get the two of you together before Election Day. Thanks so much for being here.
I've already agreed to debates. I've agreed.
We'll see if we can get it to happen then. Take a quick break. Back with more. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.